VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker. We are doing the July 5th thing. We've got less than 3 weeks from training camp. Rookies report, and then veterans follow 2 days later. And I'm here with Josh Frey. He and I are off next week, so we're getting together to start to set the table for roster trim downs, which is far off, but we'll get there. How are you, sir?
I'm doing all right, man. Getting ready to get this thing finally going. We're into July already, and a couple weeks from training camp. I feel it in my bones. I'm ready to get it going.
But first, you're going to Arkansas. You're gonna camp or fish. Tell us what you're gonna be doing.
Yeah, so me and my family got a cabin down in Arkansas, right on the Missouri border. It's actually in a town called Flippin. So if anybody's familiar with the area, drop a comment and let me know where I need to go. But yeah, doing a lot of fishing, a lot of hiking. It's gonna be a good time.
Do you fish in Minnesota, in Wisconsin as is, or is this fishing a brand new endeavor for you?
I used to a lot when I was a kid. Haven't done it as much now that I'm kind of just on my own and have to make
Mm-hmm.
my own time to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely looking forward to getting back into it.
Okay, but you know how to do it. That's the
Oh
important
yeah,
part.
yeah,
All right,
yeah.
sweet, sweet. All right, here's what I've asked you to do. Usually when we get together on Wednesdays in the off season, we come up with lists or ranking systems. And last summer, kind of falling out of the sky, there were two players that were cut that had me and you and the rest of Vikings fans going, "What?" The first one was Armin Watts. And, he's not a Pro Bowler. He did all right for the Bears last year. But last year at this time, he was coming up. He looked good as a starter in pieces in 2021. So we thought, oh, this guy's going to be a starting defensive tackle for the Minnesota Vikings. Nope. He was cut. And then after the Jalen Reagor trade, Amir Smith-Marset, who turned out to be a relative nothing burger for the Bears and Chiefs later on, was cut by the Vikings. But at this time last year, he was the WR4. And there is no difference whatsoever between the way we feel about Jalen Nailor right now and Amir Smith-Marset last year. Both men came on strong at the end of their rookie seasons. Both men are mid to late round draft picks. So I want to get guys and gals thinking about surprise cuts this offseason. I don't care about, Calvin Avery getting cut or like
Right.
a total UDFA. I want to know the guys that we have on our minds that could fall out of the sky. Once again, having you and me going, what? They cut that guy. So you're going to unveil a list for us. And I want to give a gigantic ass disclaimer is that not all 4 or 5 of these guys are going to be cut. But if there is a surprising cut, it's probably going to be a guy from Josh's list. Does that make sense, sir?
That makes a ton of sense. Yep, ready to get this thing going.
All right. So, folks, remember last year, Amir Smith-Marset, Armin Watts were released. These are the kind of dudes that could happen to this year. Count us down, sir. Who do you got either at the bottom or the top of your list?
I'm gonna get us started. We're going offensive tackle here. I'm going
Mm-hmm.
Blake Brandel.
Okay.
I think he had a really strong game against the Bills, and then he came in again against the Jets and had a really decent performance in that one too. So credit to him being able to step in for injury and step up the way that he did, especially Buffalo. But the rest of the season wasn't super great for him when he had to fill in against the Dallas Cowboys, New England Patriots, Detroit Lions. Allowed 4 sacks in those games per PFF, and there's no dead money involved if they do opt to cut him. They save 940,000 in cap savings, which I mean the Vikings have a ton of cap space as is, but especially if they're thinking roll some of this over into 2024 where you need to extend Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, Christian Darrisaw, all these guys that need new contracts, every penny counts in that scenario. So I think that that's something to pay attention to. Vidarian Lowe, a crazy draft pick, Big Ten offensive tackle, logged over 3,000 snaps at left tackle while he was at Illinois. So he definitely knows what he's doing at the position. He has 141,000 in dead money. They don't save as much by cutting him, and I think that they definitely want to keep him around because he was really good at Illinois, and I think that he definitely has a baseline. He knows what he's doing. He checks all the boxes. And then there's Ali Udo, which they lose money if they cut him, and he can play guard as well. So if it comes down to it, it comes down to brass tacks, and they need to find some sort of roster spot that maybe they want to keep one of these defensive veterans around, like especially safety. They only had 4 on the roster last year. Between Harrison Smith, Lewis Seen, Josh Metellus, Cam Bynum, Jay Ward, which one of those guys is an automatic cut? I don't think you can say that any of those guys are an automatic cut at this point in time. So if it does come down to it, they want to keep one of these defenders around in an uncertain year. It might come down to Blake Brandel.
Okay, the homegrown product, Brandel. He's been, is it 2 or 3 years now? He's on the depth chart. Is this
I think
Second?
this is three.
Okay, that's going on 3. And then Jackie Chen, do you think he's a practice squatter or do you think he's just released?
I think that he's a practice squad kind of
Okay.
guy. Yeah. Just another developmental piece. Get him on there and see what he can do.
I challenge folks to pull up. I think there was a Star Tribune article about him last or a month, maybe 6 weeks ago. The guy looks like a badass.
Yeah, he
A
does.
lot of times in football, I'm all about the look and sometimes the quarterback, the name. And Jackie Chen has the look. Remember that Dustin Baker said it. All right. So Blake Brandel making room for a crazy guy, Vidarian Lowe, Jackie Chen to the practice squad, and Oli Udo if he stops with the speeding tickets. Makes the roster safely, or moreover, the general legal infractions for Oli Udo.
Right.
Anytime I
Yeah.
see his name in the news, it's usually a throwback to the Vikings in the mid 2000s, where it's like, oh, looks like so and so was arrested Saturday. It happens. All right,
Stay out of trouble, Ollie.
Yep, yeah, those speeding tickets will get you. All right, who's the next one? I think your list is 4 altogether, right?
Yeah, correct. 4. So number 2, we're going linebacker here. Troy Reeder, obviously signed in free agency this offseason, had a really strong season in 2021. Kevin O'Connell's last season in Los Angeles with the Rams when they won the Super Bowl. But last year he played just 62 defensive snaps with the Chargers. Didn't really get on the field much. He's turning 29 years old right after week 1. So if the Vikings want to go in a sort of a youth movement for the defense, that's not really the direction of a guy that you want to keep around. Plus, if you look back to this spring, Kwesi spent time at the combine talking up William Kwenku. And out of Temple, who spent 6 years at Temple, had 10.5 tackles for loss in his final season there. He's a burly run-stopping linebacker, which in a Brian Flores defense, that feels like the kind of guy that you want to keep around. So I wouldn't be surprised if they try to make a spot on the roster for him. Plus Ivan Pace, we spent a lot of time talking about that guy as well. One of the top UDFAs in the entire 2023 class. So it wouldn't be a surprise either if they want to keep him around. In fact, I'd be surprised if they didn't keep him around on the final 53-man roster. And at the end of the day, again, if they want to make room somewhere else on the depth chart, Troy Reeder, a veteran guy, you can save money by cutting him. I think it's just over $1 million that they'd save by cutting him. That might be where they end up going.
So in addition to being on this show, you should proliferate that Quinku in idea, because that's not really out there in the stratosphere. Yeah. In fact, when I do my roster projection, I can't remember off the top of my head if I have him in there or I don't. But you should really get that one out there, whether it's on Purple PTSD or say it again on here this summer, because I think right now it's all the Ivan Pace mania, mainly because folks thought he was drafted. The good news is for everybody but Troy Reeder, it would be good news, I should say, if he's cut, because that will have meant that Ivan Pace is the real deal, or that Quinco has effectuated the prophecy that you put forth here. Because you know what, they signed Reeder in March, and if it turns out they realize, yeah, we don't need him, that will mean that somebody young has emerged and therefore taken that roster spot from, I guess, the technically would be Kendricks, even though Asamoah's filling those shoes. It will have meant Asamoah's cooking, Hicks is doing the Hicks thing, Ivan Pace looks like the real deal, or Quinku has that dog in him. So that one is anchored.
Asamoah might end up being the X factor in that one as well, because if they don't need if he can be the guy that they feel comfortable starting in that starting lineup defensively, then again, Reeder's presence is not exactly the most necessary, especially if he's making $1 million this year. So yeah, definitely keep an eye on that.
Yeah, I think the only thing I thought when Reeder was signed was depth in case Asamoah doesn't show up and look like a badass right away. And the subtle tied it to the Rams when Kevin O'Connell, because he was on that Super Bowl team, correct?
He was, yeah.
Okay. All right, awesome. All right, your list is halfway complete. Who is number 3?
Number 3, I'm gonna go back to safety here. If maybe they keep Randall around and then they have to cut a safety, I'm gonna go Cam Bynum, just because he had a few strong games in 2021, but last season as a starter definitely had a few miscues, especially in coverage. Wasn't the best coverage safety out there, and his strengths, run defense, tackling, graded really well on PFF last year, even in those categories. But those are the same strengths that Lewis Cine has at this point in his game. Like Cine, over his final 2 years at Georgia, PFF graded him 80+ in both tackling and run defense. And he was a pretty damn good coverage safety over his last 2 years there as well. So if he can be an improvement on that over Bynum, then I think that he has a really good shot at making this starting lineup, assuming he's fully healthy, assuming he's up to full speed with the defense, everything by the time training camp gets going. And then Josh Metellus too. Like last season, he made 3 starts. I think he's going to be one of the more underrated names on this Vikings defense. He's probably, I'd be shocked if he didn't stick around this season. And despite the limited opportunities, he was great in coverage. He basically can do just about everything. He's a special teams enforcer as well. And the Vikings save $760,000 of Bynum's $1.1 million if they get rid of him. So that's more than what can be said about Scene, especially who they'd lose a bunch of money if they cut him this early. So I'd be really surprised if Bynum wasn't the last safety on the depth chart at least.
And that would be noteworthy because he played every single Vikings play defensively last year.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. I mean, that's a lot of experience. So even if he does get cut or doesn't last long for the Vikings in general, he's got a lot of experience and should latch on elsewhere. So that would mean that they roll with Harrison Smith, Scene, Metellus, and Jay Ward. Is that correct?
Yeah, those would be my 4 right now, especially with Ward. We talked about this after the draft too, but he can play just about everywhere defensively. So again, I'd be really surprised if they didn't keep him around, especially with Kwesi's track record of keeping his draft picks on the roster as long as possible.
Yeah. Ward's got to stick around for a while. And I think the only question becomes is would they employ 5 safeties, assuming Theo Jackson goes to the practice squad?
Yeah.
All right. So we got Brandel, Troy Reeder, Cameron Bynum. Who is the final man on your list?
Final one, and the one that I probably feel the most confident about, is DJ Wonnum. He's entering a contract year this season, hasn't really turned into that starting caliber player that a lot of Vikings fans probably hoped he would after he was drafted. And even with the loss of Zadarius Smith this offseason, Patrick Jones is probably a more talented player at this point in his career. Andre Carter, you have to keep an eye on him as a UDFA out of Army. We talked about him a ton. The Vikings saved almost $3 million by cutting him, and Wonnum has less dead money to his name than both Jones and Carter. And I feel like if Kwesi, a finance guy, wants to pay people as little as possible for not being on his roster, I feel like Wonnum would be the way to go if they have to trim down the edge spot at all.
So yeah, that would be another one that's noteworthy because he's becoming he's going to maybe play out his rookie contract.
Yeah.
And of course he made the huge name for himself in 2020 with the sack on Rodgers that ended that game.
Yeah.
But that one, he was on my list when I started thinking about this exercise, mainly because, especially assuming Hunter stays, yeah,
that's a big thing. Yeah, if Hunter's gone, then yeah, I'd be shocked if this move went down.
Yeah, it's sad. It's scary to think, I should say, if Hunter was traded and there's no Chase Young coming back, or who was the dude from those? Who was the dude from Peyton? Who was the dude from the Saints that Bleacher Report threw out there? Peyton Turner.
Peyton Turner.
Yeah. If they don't get somebody who's startable, then you're going to need all the bodies you can get, whether that's Wonnum and Jones. So briefly on my list, ours overlapped. I had Bynum because of the crowded room at safety. Good problem to have. And Wonnum for sure. In fact, I think in my projections, I don't have Wonnum making the roster, mainly because of the Andre Carter enthusiasm. And then again, to keep pounding home, assuming Hunter's not traded, then it's a little bit crowded, because there's also, speaking of what you said in Kwesi enjoying his guys, they could keep Luigi Villain. And that would mean that somebody would be on the chopping block, because you can't keep this many guys on 53. My other ones, again, to reiterate for the 4th time, in the vein of surprise roster cuts like Armin Watts last year or Amir Smith-Marset, I have Patrick Jones. That's how, if he was cut, it would feel like IMS or Armin Watts, because I'm high on him. Every time I see him on the field, he does something really good. I'm like, man, you got to get this guy more snaps. So Patrick Jones could be thoroughly surprising. And the only reason I included him on this makeshift list is because he was not drafted by this regime, and in fact was one of the sole survivors from the mass purge of the 2021 Vikings draft. The other guys that I have are James Lynch. He's not a Kwesi guy, and the DT room is already pretty crowded. if they really lean into this kick return rule, Kane and Wangu could be the odd man out because they have 4 running backs. And even though we've begged for it, they don't really use him on offense. Again, I don't really think Wangu or Patrick Jones are going to be cut, but these are just getting them out in the stratosphere. And then finally, my big wild card, literally big, is Kairos Tonga. If for some reason they, Yannick Eckhart from Vikings territory kind of banged the drum on Calvin Avery lately about how he's a big nose tackle, or even Jaquelin Roy, who's not as big as a nose. If we get to camp and preseason and those guys really look good, then they had no problem getting rid of Duke Shelley, who played wonderfully last year, and so did Tonga. And Tonga only cost them $940,000. So that would be another one that you might think, well, they just signed him and he was outstanding when he played last year. And they're like, nope, Flores is going with Jaquelin Roy or Calvin Avery or Sheldon Day or somebody like that. No, so just getting those out there for us to warm up to. All right, I think we got them all covered, sir. Are you still I think everybody that I'm talking to in this Viking space kind of feels like they're a 10-7 team with this schedule, 11-6 if things go quite well. Is that where you're sitting at when we're about 2.5 weeks from camp?
Yeah, I think right now, especially if the NFC North does get better across the board, like I don't think the Vikings got worse per se. I think they probably got a little bit better this offseason, but unfortunately the division got better right around with them. Even in Green Bay, you can make the argument that they're a little bit better than they were last year with the acquisitions at tight end, wide receiver that they made. So yeah, I'd probably go, if I had gun to my head, I'd probably go 10-7 wild card appearance. But I do think that they're a deeper team than they were even last year. They're better defensively, obviously, with Brian Flores, and hopefully with his scheme that they get a little bit more sacks going and just a little bit more high flying stuff going on in the defensive scheme. But I think their ceiling probably 12-5, go back to back and contend for one of those top seeds in the NFC.
Yeah, I'm settling right now on 10-7, and I want to be talked into at camp in preseason, even though preseason football really doesn't matter. I want to be talked into at 11-6. It's just every time I go look at the schedule, it flows nicely, but the opponents are still like rough and tumble. And last year I felt the exact opposite because you had 9 home games, 7 real road games, and 1 neutral siter in London. I wanted to uplift too Bucky Brooks on NFL.com. He was the first guy that I've seen pick the Green Bay Packers to win the division.
That was interesting. Yeah.
One of my dark horse things for I guess the summer, and this is horrible to say, is I think the Packers are going to be pretty decent. I guess I'm just accustomed to their quarterbacks being legitimate, so I think Love is going to look good. Hopefully, probably not a Hall of Famer. But when I saw that for Brooks, I'm like, all right, somebody's starting to see it, because I've grown really sick of all of the Lions enthusiasm because it's a foregone conclusion that they're going to win the division. And I really racked my brain about it last week, trying to figure out why is it this bottom feeding team that everybody has said, oh yeah. I mean, even odds makers. And I think I figured it out. You're going to laugh at this. But I'm convinced after a lot of contemplation that the reason that folks are in on the Lions is because they were on Hard Knocks. I think the world fell in love with the little engine that could. They got an intimate view. And this is a compliment to the Lions. This isn't just saying, oh, you're on HBO. No, it's because they saw what Dan Campbell can do. And therefore, because they feel like they're part of the family now, I think that was the clearance that they need to say, like, all right, I'm in on the Lions because I got to watch blah, blah, blah episodes worth of them. I think that's the only thing that makes sense, because this is the Lions we're talking about, the Lions. So this should be about like 50-50. Like half the pundits still think the Vikings, who are 13-4, are going to win the thing. Half of them picking the Lions to be sneaky good. But it's like 98% picking the Lions. Does any of that make sense to you at all? My speech?
Yeah. No, I think the Hard Knocks thing, you getting to see Dan Campbell with his guys. He's doing push-ups out on the field with them, stuff like that. And then you get into the actual season. They win 6 of their last 7 games, something like that. And they just destroy Green Bay on the road to prevent them from getting into the playoffs when it doesn't even matter to them at all. Like all it did was make their draft position a little bit worse. So I mean, yeah, all of that combined, I think everybody fell in love with the Lions. But listen, I mean, their defense was horrible last year. They got a legit secondary, at least for 2023, with Sutton, Gardner Johnson, all these guys that they got in free agency, the draft. They had a little bit of a strange order in terms of their draft picks, but I mean, Jack Campbell's a decent linebacker. Jahmyr Gibbs, I think he's going to be an explosive playmaker for them on the offensive side of the ball. So I'm one of these guys that's kind of in on the Lions this year. Unfortunately, I think they're going to be pretty damn good. I don't know if they're necessarily going to be like 13-4, being the top seed in the NFC or something like that. But if I had to pick somebody to win the division right now, it'd probably be them.
Oh, so you're one of them.
I'm one of
see.
them.
All right,
yeah.
fair enough. No, all right. I guess
No,
I
I
really
think,
should start believing it, so it's not surprising when it gets here.
yeah, I mean, I think it honestly might even be a 4-team race down to the last few weeks of the season, depending on what Justin Fields does in Chicago this year. But at least between Minnesota, Green Bay, Detroit, I think it's going to be a pretty tight race. And then I'd have Detroit edging out Minnesota, and then Minnesota getting in a wild card spot. Green Bay probably something like 9-8, 10-7, but maybe Minnesota gets a tiebreaker over them. So yeah, that's kind of how I see the NFC North falling this year, at least as of now.
I'll point out a very ominous nugget here that the way that we're talking about Justin Fields this spring, summer, this offseason feels exactly the way we talked about Josh Allen going into 2020. And
Jalen Hurts too.
Yeah. And that turned there was the camp, so Josh Allen in 2018 and 2019 was notoriously inaccurate. And then he got Stephon Diggs and he became not inaccurate. He didn't become quite Mahomes-esque. But the lead up to it was there was a camp that said, well, he's got to start completing his passes before we even talk about him being a Pro Bowler or blah, blah, blah. And that's exactly what we're saying about Justin Fields right now. And Fields is even a better athlete than Josh Allen. So at least he's faster. So it comes down to whether or not Fields can truly make the jump to this accurate passer, because I've never seen anything like it. I think it was week 6. They played the Commanders on Thursday Night Football. It looked like shit. And then they came back and stomped the Patriots. And I think that was in New England. But they definitely, I
believe so.
Yeah, they beat them like 33-20. And then they lost every single game after that. But in the meantime, we decided while they're losing all these games that Justin Fields is fantastic. So it's
pretty good.
This odd dichotomy of who's it going to be. All right, man, these dogs are starting to go nuts. So we'll talk to you, sir, in 2 weeks. All right.
Sounds great, man.
Take it easy.